The mahogany door to my mother's study wasn't entirely closed. It missed the latch by less than half an inch, a tiny gap, barely visible unless you were looking for it. In my line of work, half an inch is a mountain. Half an inch is the difference between a legally binding land title and a voided contract. Inside, the crystal chandelier hummed softly. My mother, Eleanor, sat behind her glass desk, swirling a glass of white wine. Opposite her sat my fiancé, Julian, looking uncomfortably stiff in his dinner jacket, and my younger sister, Clara, who was carelessly filing her nails. Julian, listen to me, my mother's voice carried through the crack. It was smooth, persuasive, and completely devoid of guilt. Thea is paying the down payment because she has the liquidity. She's an archivist, she hoards money the way she hoards paper. But the title needs to be placed into a family trust. Clara needs a safe haven, and as the younger sister, she deserves 40% ownership. Julian cleared his throat, his posture shifting nervously. Eleanor, I don't know. Thea put up $200,000 of her own hard-earned savings for Oakridge Estate. She mapped out every detail. And she will still live there, Eleanor cut in, her tone sharpening into that familiar, quiet authority. She doesn't need the whole place to herself. She's quiet. She lives in the background. Clara is the one who entertains, who brings light into this family. Thea owes this to her sister. She won't even notice until the papers are finalized. You just sign where I tell you to sign, Julian. I stood in the dimly lit hallway, clutching a tray of crystal glasses. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. In archival restoration, when you discover a forged signature on an ancient document, you don't burn the paper. You don't scream at the artifact. You set it down under a magnifying lens, pull out your finest pen, and begin the audit. I gently set the tray on the hallway console, reached into my coat pocket, and pulled out my archival ink pen. On the palm of my hand, I drew a single, clean black line. Boundary audit, initiated. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories. Before we continue, let me know in the comments below, where are you listening from today? And if you've ever had a family member treat your hard work as their personal charity, drop a silent thumbs up. Now, let's return to the story. My name is Thea. For 9 years, I have worked as a senior estate planning archivist. My job is simple, yet devastatingly precise. I organize, verify, and authenticate high-value family estates, land deeds, and historic wills. I deal in original ink, watermarks, and binding clauses. I spent my life learning that people lie, emotional speeches rot, but the ledger always tells the truth. In our family, there were always 2 distinct records. First, there was Clara, my younger sister by 3 years. Clara was the shining light. She was radiant, loud, impulsive, and constantly in financial chaos. If Clara bought a dress she couldn't afford, my mother called it expressing her artistic spirit. If Clara crashed her 3rd car, my mother called it a tragic misunderstanding. Then there was me. I was the reliable one, invisible, functional. When I spent 80 hours a week auditing corporate deeds to build my savings, my mother called it a shame that I didn't have a social life. When I met Julian 2 years ago, I thought I had found someone who valued calm over chaos. Julian was an architect, gentle, soft-spoken, and deeply averse to confrontation. He was the kind of man who would rather apologize for a mistake he didn't make than endure a 5-minute argument. My mother loved Julian, not because he was right for me, but because he was malleable. She saw him as a soft hinge she could bend whenever she wanted to open a door into my life. 3 months ago, Julian and I decided to buy Oakridge Estate, a historic, stone-built craftsman home on the edge of the city. It required extensive legal clearing and a massive down payment. I provided $200,000 in cash, every single cent harvested from 9 years of quiet, painstaking archival work. Julian was supposed to cover the monthly mortgage once his firm finalized their quarterly bonuses. It was a clear, balanced agreement, or so I thought. The day after the engagement party, the quiet intrusions began. I was sitting at my home desk, reviewing the property title draft sent over by the seller's lawyer, when the front door chimed. Eleanor and Clara walked in unannounced. Eleanor held a massive ring binder under her arm, while Clara held a cup of iced coffee, tapping her designer heels against my hardwood floors. "Thea, darling," Eleanor said, not even removing her coat as she dropped the binder onto my pristine desk, right over my legal notes. "We've made some necessary adjustments for Oakridge." I didn't lift my head immediately. I finished writing a date in my ledger, carefully capped my fountain pen, and then looked up. Adjustments? Yes, Clara chimed in, walking toward the window and running her acrylic nails along my blinds. Mom and I visited the estate this morning. The east wing, the one with the sunroom, it's completely wasted as a study for you. I'm moving my studio there. Your studio? I asked, keeping my voice entirely level, cool as slate. Clara, that room is designated for my climate-controlled document storage. It's part of my work-from-home contract. Eleanor let out a soft, patronizing chuckle. Oh, Thea, you can store your old papers in the basement. Clara needs natural light for her content creation. Besides, I spoke to the contractor this morning. We're knocking down the dividing wall in the main suite to make a walk-in closet for her. You spoke to my contractor? I repeated. Our contractor, Eleanor corrected smoothly, leaning over my desk. We are a family, Thea. You've always been so rigid, so transactional. You need to learn how to share. Julian already agreed it was a wonderful idea when I called him this morning. I looked at my mother's face. There was no anger there, no hatred, just a complete terrifying assumption that my assets were merely community property waiting to be redistributed to her favorite child. I took a slow breath. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I see, I said softly, pulling the binder toward me. Leave the notes on the desk. I will review them. Good girl, Eleanor smiled, tapping my cheek with two cold fingers. I knew you'd be reasonable. As the door clicked shut behind them, I picked up my phone and dialed Julian. He answered on the third ring, his voice tight. Hey Thea, listen, if this is about your mom. Julian, I interrupted, my tone calm, measured, and dangerously still. Did you authorize my mother to change the architectural plans for Oakridge Estate? A long, heavy silence stretched over the line. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy, suffocating, and filled with a guilt that Julian couldn't hide even if he tried. I stood in my office, holding the receiver, waiting. I didn't push him. In archival work, when a witness hesitates, you simply let the silence press against them until they yield. Finally, Julian exhaled, a long, ragged sound. Thea, please, he said, his voice dropping an octave. Your mother called me this morning. She was so excited about the redesign. She said Clara was having a breakdown about her current apartment lease ending, and that having her in the East Wing would solve everything. I didn't agree to anything finalized. I just told her I wouldn't stand in the way if you were okay with it. You didn't stand in the way, I repeated softly, letting the precise weight of those words settle between us. Julian, that is my down payment. That is my name on the purchase agreement. You gave her permission to alter a property that you haven't contributed a single dollar toward yet. Thea, we're getting married in 4 months, he argued, his tone shifting into that desperate pleading he always used when conflict overwhelmed him. What's mine is yours, what's yours is ours. That's how family works. My family has always operated on togetherness. Why does everything have to be a legal battle with you? Because when togetherness isn't documented, Julian, one person always ends up paying for everyone else's comfort, I said. I hung up the phone without waiting for his response. I didn't cry. Tears leave salt stains on parchment, and emotional outbursts solve zero structural defects. Instead, I opened my safe and pulled out the primary ledger, a leather-bound book where I recorded every financial interaction, loan, and favor involving my family over the last 9 years. Page 42, $14,000 to Eleanor for Clara's private college tuition arrears, marked as a loan, 0 repayment in 7 years. Page 68, $8,500 for Clara's car insurance settlement after her second accident, marked as urgent, 0 repayment. Page 91, $22,000 for Eleanor's country club membership deposit to maintain family standing, 0 repayment. The total stood at $86,400. All quietly absorbed by me under the guise of being the reliable older daughter. But Oakridge Estate was where the ledger closed. The following afternoon, I drove down to the county record's office. The air inside smelled of old paper, ozone, and binding glue, a scent that had always grounded me. I met with Mr. Vance, a senior property lawyer who had known my firm for over a decade. He looked over the initial draft of the trust document my mother had tried to quietly submit through her family attorney. Thea, this draft is absurd, Mr. Vance noted, sliding his glasses down his nose as he scanned the pages. It attempts to grant secondary ownership rights to Clara Vance upon the closing of the sale, funded entirely by your initial deposit. If you sign this, you effectively become a landlord who cannot evict your own tenant, and she acquires equity without financial contribution. Is your fiancé aware of this? My fiancé is currently confused about the definition of ownership, I said calmly. I need you to draft an absolute single-entity deed. Sole ownership under my name alone. Furthermore, I want a binding prenuptial agreement drafted regarding Oakridge Estate. If the marriage proceeds, the estate remains entirely separate property. If it does not proceed, no party can claim reimbursement for unfulfilled promises. Mr. Vance looked at me over the rim of his glasses, a slow, respectful nod escaping him. You're building a firewall. I'm preserving the original document, I corrected. 3 days later, my mother called a mandatory family dinner at an upscale steakhouse downtown. She chose the table in the very center of the dining room, surrounded by glittering crystal and low hums of conversation, the perfect stage for her favorite performance. When I arrived, Eleanor was already sipping champagne, Clara was admiring a new diamond ring my mother had undoubtedly bought her, and Julian sat beside them, looking pale and exhausted. Thea, sit down, darling, Eleanor greeted me, waving a manicured hand toward the empty chair. We have so much to celebrate tonight. I sat down, smoothing the fabric of my skirt, keeping my posture perfectly aligned. The waiter poured water into my glass and I caught Julian's eye. He looked away, focusing intently on his linen napkin. I spoke to the contractor again today, Clara announced, her voice carrying easily over the neighboring tables. He said the East Wing renovations can start the week after closing. I'm thinking warm beige walls with brushed brass fixtures for my studio. It's going to look incredible on my channel. Eleanor beamed at her, patting her hand gently. It's going to be marvelous, sweetie. You deserve a dedicated space to thrive. Then Eleanor turned her gaze toward me, her eyes narrowing slightly into that practiced look of maternal affection that always felt like cold glass. Thea, I stopped by your lawyer's office yesterday to check on the trust paperwork. Imagine my surprise when the secretary told me the file had been locked under private restriction. I assume that was just a procedural misunderstanding. It wasn't a misunderstanding, I said quietly, taking a small sip of my water. The file is restricted because the title structure has been finalized. Finalized? Clara dropped her fork, the metal clinking loudly against her porcelain plate. What do you mean finalized? Mom said we were signing the trust agreement together next week. Julian, speak up, Eleanor commanded, her voice dropping into that sharp, icy tone she used whenever her authority was questioned. Tell your fiancé how property planning works in a family. Julian cleared his throat, his face flushing dark red under the restaurant lights. Thea, we discussed this. Your mom just wants to make sure Clara has security. We have plenty of space in Oakridge. It doesn't hurt us to share the title. You haven't put $1 into the down payment, Julian, I said, my voice remaining completely flat, unbothered, and soft. So when you say it doesn't hurt us, what you mean is it doesn't hurt you. Eleanor's face hardened, the polite maternal mask slipping away to reveal the cold calculation beneath. You are being profoundly selfish, Thea. After everything this family has done for you, after all the support we've given you, you sit there and hoard a house as if you built your life entirely alone. Clara is your sister. She has nothing. You have everything. I didn't flinch. I reached into my leather bag sitting on the chair beside me and pulled out a sleek black document folder. I didn't slam it down. I laid it gently onto the white tablecloth, right between Eleanor's wine glass and Clara's plate. What is that? Clara sneered, leaning back with her arms crossed. That is the complete financial audit of this family for the last 9 years, I said softly. And right beneath it is the single-owner deed for Oakridge Estate, registered exclusively in my name. The silence that fell over our table was absolute. Even the soft ambient noise of the steakhouse seemed to fade into a distant blur. Eleanor stared at the black leather folder sitting on the crisp white tablecloth as if it were a venomous snake. Clara's mouth hung slightly open, her carefully curated composure shattering in a single instant. Julian sat entirely frozen, his eyes darting between the document and my face, realizing for the very first time that the quiet woman he assumed he could push around had spent weeks quietly surrounding him with unshakable legal walls. What is the meaning of this, Thea? Eleanor asked, her voice dangerously low, stripped of every ounce of fake maternal warmth. I mean exactly what I said, I replied, my voice dropping into that calm, measured tone that I used when authenticating century-old deeds. Inside that folder on page 1 is the certified land registry for Oakridge Estate. The $200,000 down payment was wired yesterday morning from my personal account. The title is registered solely and exclusively under my name. There is no family trust. There is no joint tenancy. And there is no 40% allocation for Clara. Clara slammed her hands on the table, making the wine glasses chime softly. You can't do that. Mom promised me that room. You knew I was relying on this house to launch my brand studio. You're ruining my future on purpose. My mother didn't promise you a room, Clara, I said, turning my eyes to face her directly. She promised you my money. She promised you my labor. And she promised you my peace. But my ledger is closed. Beneath the title deed in that folder, Eleanor, you will find an itemized financial statement spanning from March of 2017 to June of this year. Every tuition payment I covered for Clara, every car repair bill I settled, every vanity project and club membership I quietly underwrote while you called me transactional and cold. The grand total is $86,400. Eleanor's face flushed a deep mottled red. How dare you, she hissed, leaning across the table. How dare you keep a tab on your own family? Family supports one another. We don't act like accountants keeping track of debts. If this were family support, Eleanor, it would have flowed both ways, I said softly. But for 9 years, I have been treated as an invisible cash reservoir while Clara was celebrated for simply existing. When I built my career, you called it boring. When I saved my income, you called it hoarding. But the moment those savings took the shape of a historic estate, you suddenly remembered that we were a family. I turned my head slowly toward Julian. He looked completely broken, staring down at his untouched steak. Julian, I said, my voice as still as ice. When we met, I thought you were a gentle man who valued peace. But I have realized that you don't value peace at all. You value quiet compliance. You would rather let my mother strip away my hard-earned assets than face 5 minutes of uncomfortable conversation. You are not peaceful, Julian. You are simply weak. Thea, please, Julian stammered, reaching out a trembling hand across the table to touch my arm. We can fix this. I didn't know your mom was asking for all of that. I was just trying to keep everyone happy. I don't want us to ruin our engagement over property. I looked at his hand on my sleeve, then looked back up into his eyes. A partnership built on the sacrifice of one person isn't a relationship, Julian. It's an exploitation. I am an archivist. My entire life is dedicated to ensuring that original documents remain uncorrupted by unauthorized hands. I will not sign my own life away to a man who hands the pen to my mother every time she asks for it. I reached down, unclasped the diamond engagement ring from my finger, and set it down gently right on top of the black folder. The engagement is terminated, I said, keeping my voice completely even. The contract is void. Eleanor let out a sharp, breathless gasp. You're breaking up with him over a house. You are completely out of your mind, Thea. You will end up completely alone in that giant, empty home with nobody to love you. I stood up slowly, smoothing the front of my dress, feeling a profound, weightless calm wash over my chest for the first time in my adult life. I would rather sit alone in a quiet house built by my own hands, I said, looking Eleanor dead in the eye, than live in a crowded home where my dignity is auctioned off to the highest bidder. I picked up my clutch bag, left $100 bill on the table to cover my water and dinner, and turned around. I walked out of the steakhouse with measured, unhurried steps. I could hear Clara beginning to sob behind me, and Eleanor's sharp voice attempting to call my name, but their noise faded the moment the heavy glass doors of the restaurant closed behind me. The cool night air hit my face, fresh and crisp. 2 weeks later, the closing papers for Oakridge Estate were officially recorded at the county courthouse. I moved in on a rainy Saturday afternoon. The house was vast, filled with the rich scent of old oak, stone fireplaces, and fresh rain against the tall glass windows. There were no arguments in the hallway. There were no unannounced visits. There were no demands for space or subtle manipulations. I set up my study in the east wing, right where the morning sunlight poured through the window panels, illuminating my antique desk and my rows of historical ledgers. Julian tried to call me 7 times over the first month, leaving long, apologetic voicemails, but I never called back. Blocked contacts leave no paper trail. Eleanor sent a cold, furious email claiming I was dead to the family, but when I didn't respond, the silence eventually took over. People like my mother only thrive when you engage in their drama. When you offer them absolute, unyielding silence, they have nothing left to consume. Yesterday evening, as the sun began to set over the estate, I sat at my desk with a cup of hot tea. I opened my primary ledger to the very last page, pulled out my archival fountain pen, and drew a final, thick black line under the balance column. The audit was complete. The boundary was permanent. In archival work, we learn that you cannot prevent people from trying to rewrite history, but if you hold the original ink, you will always have the final word. 6 months passed like a quiet, well-ordered stream. Spring gave way to early autumn, and Oakridge Estate had completely transformed under my care. The garden was lush, the stone paths were clean, and the east wing had become the sanctuary I had always envisioned. There were no voices echoing in the hallways, no passive-aggressive comments floating over breakfast, and no constant underlying fear that my peace was about to be auctioned off. One crisp October afternoon, as I was restoring a 19th-century town registry at my desk, the heavy bronze door knocker chimed. I didn't rush. I placed my pen on its brass rest, closed the leather folio, and walked down the grand entryway. When I opened the door, Julian was standing on the porch. He looked thinner, his hair slightly unkempt, and the quiet confidence he used to carry was entirely gone. He held a small cardboard box containing a few of my old books that had been left at his apartment months ago. "Hello, Thea," he said, his voice hesitant, almost afraid to break the stillness of the porch. "Hello, Julian," I replied softly, leaning against the doorframe, keeping my posture relaxed and light. He looked past me into the warm, sunlit hallway of the estate, taking in the finished woodwork and the quiet elegance of the space. "It looks beautiful," he murmured, swallowing hard. "You really did it all by yourself." "I didn't do it by myself, Julian. I did it without interference." "There is a difference," I said. Julian looked down at his shoes, then back up at me, his eyes pleading. "My mother and Clara don't talk to me much anymore," he confessed, his voice cracking slightly. "Once you walked away, Eleanor realized I couldn't give her access to this house or your money. She lost interest in the wedding planning, and eventually, Clara moved out to a tiny rented studio downtown. They blame me for letting you slip away. And do you blame yourself?" I asked, my tone entirely free of malice, offering him a simple, neutral mirror. "I should have stood up for you, Thea," he whispered, tears welling in his eyes. "I thought I was being a good son and a gentle partner, but I was just a coward. I miss the quiet we used to have. I miss you." I looked at Julian, and for the first time in 2 years, I felt no anger, no disappointment, and no residual pain. In archival work, when a document is damaged beyond repair, you don't mourn the loss forever. You simply accept that the record is closed and archive it away so it no longer takes up space on your active desk. "The quiet we had was built on my silence, Julian," I told him gently, "and I am no longer willing to be quiet so other people can feel comfortable." I accepted the box of books from his hands, set it on the entry bench, and looked him in the eye one last time. "I wish you peace, Julian, truly, but this record is closed." He nodded slowly, knowing there was no argument left to make, no emotional lever left to pull. He turned around and walked down the stone path, his footsteps fading into the afternoon rustle of fallen leaves. I closed the heavy oak door, turned the brass lock, and walked back to my study. I stood by the large bay window, looking out over the golden sunlight stretching across the estate grounds. My mother had predicted I would end up lonely in a giant, empty house. But as I took a deep breath of the cool, scented air, I realized she was completely wrong. This house wasn't empty. It was filled with my autonomy, my hard work, and an unshakable sense of self-worth. I sat back down at my desk, picked up my fountain pen, and turned to a fresh, blank page in my personal journal. I wrote down a single, final thought. A life built on boundaries is not a fortress to keep the world out. It is a home to keep yourself whole. I capped the pen, set it down, and smiled into the quiet room.